Today, first time streaming, it's not going to go well, but I thought I'd try it anyway. I'm just going to be reviewing the 5e classes, just in general, not the subclasses. I think, realistically, I can't give an expert opinion on this whole stuff, because I've only really played 5 enough proper enough to say I could review them. Really. I mean, the others will just be informed opinions from either somebody that I know playing it, or somebody, or my interpretation of it based on stuff I've seen in videos and stuff, and kind of just stuff I've made by reading it, like opinions I've made via reading it. So first off, I'll start with Artificer. Even though it's kind of a pseudo official class, it's still technically a class. I think the first problem with it, well, not problem, but restriction with it that comes from it is you have this optional firearm rule. And you see, the problem with that is it kind of hints at what the Artificer actually is, which is a bit higher tech than you'd expect from most situations, most settings. Almost all of the settings in Wizards of the Coast worlds are medieval times, really. They're they're sword and shield, the occasional cannon, but really just sword and shield. And I think this means that this one has a hard time appearing. You can do Eberron. Eberron's not horrendous, um, but that's just one setting. And so you're kind of restricted with this, and you'll find more and more that the setting that you're starting in can't really have this. Can't really have this class in it without it feeling a bit out of place. Especially this one, the Armorer, because the Armorer one effectively gives you a Iron Man suit, and it just doesn't feel like it fits in a lot of settings. Like you can kind of sort of like come up with some reason and flavor why there's an alchemist. Alchemist kind of is the one that sort of fits the most. Making some form of artificial life. It's not too far out there. Um, but when you look at like Armorer, you're just Iron Man. It just makes you think of higher tech stuff. So first rule it has that isn't an optional rule is magic tinkering. Magic tinkering is pretty interesting because it effectively makes it so that you always have a thief's tool or artisan's tool, which is quite useful because this means that you can effectively go without them and be in situations where you've been searched and all they found is just, all your weapons and all your little trinkets and stuff. But then when you get in there, you can just you can do like a MacGyver kind of thing where you just turn a load of stuff into like a lockpick or something like that. I think to a certain extent it would kind of make sense for this to be a thing that, at least with the thieves tools, works for a rogue as well. I quite like this ability, and I like that it also gives a bunch of ways you can use it that aren't thieves tools and artisans tools. And artisans tools in general, look, you get all of the access to all of these things. They can be quite useful, especially if you build this person to be very heavy proficiencies. Like it has a load of proficiencies. Like maybe you make it so that to make their like armor or to make their like mechanized companion, they have jewelry tools to put in like magical jewels that power the thing, smith's tools to make the actual body. You can add a load of stuff to it, and a lot of these abilities that aren't related to thieves tools and artisan tools are actually quite useful. Like having bright light, probably the least useful because a lot of, and this is a problem with D&D that I get seen a lot, and I do agree with it to a certain extent. Where people complain about how there are so many races that have dark vision, and it makes it a lot worse for a lot of people. I, to a certain extent, agree with this, but I, I guess if you're doing a high up, if a lot of your people are like humans and dragonborn, and frankly that's really it, um, then maybe it's fine. Then you have this whenever talked by a creature emits a recorded message. This can be interesting, especially when paired with something like the alert feat, because it allows you to effectively have instant evidence of something happening, because you can just play it. Also, it would work if there was some sort of like voice command kind of thing, which you can see occasionally in like Wizard's Towers or something in settings. Then you have this one. It's very much like Thaumaturgy or the other one. It's one of the two. The ones that gives you a load of like out of combat abilities. I quite like it because it means that you're not stuck to just fighting, which will be a problem for a couple classes that I'll get onto later. This visual effect one is quite interesting. Again, very similar to like a Thaumaturgy or a Minor Illusion. These things will come up a decent amount of times, in my opinion. Next, you got basic spellcasting things. It's interesting here that your spellcasting focus can be like a tool, like an artisan's tool or a thieves' tool, because that kind of gives it this unique thing. It's very similar to how a couple of clerics, maybe all clerics, I'm not 100% sure, can have it on their shield. It just gives a new sort of way you can do your catalyst, which is quite interesting. This is just generic spellcasting ability. This bit's quite useful because having it based on intelligence is something that I feel like will come up a fair amount of time, because you'll see how a lot of different kinds of classes and stuff. Just gonna make sure these adverts on it because I don't really think we need them. We'll just make this a bit bigger. Yeah, it's probably good. Um, yeah, that's probably the best we're gonna get. Sorry if it looks a bit janky. Again, my first time. Anyway, having it be intelligence modifier is quite useful because there is very little that I don't know if is useful, but it's definitely like helpful in the scheme of things, because there's not a lot of things that use intelligence. Intelligence has just wizards, and that's really it. And kind of intelligence is, at least in my group, probably considered the least important of the ability scores, because you've got con that gives you health, strength or dex are going to be your attack modifier on all your martial classes, and dex is just insane just in general. Dex is by far the best ability score. You've got wisdom that a lot of saving throws use, um, kind of the majority. Same with con actually. Con comes up a decent amount of time, and dex again, because dex is incredible. And so this one sort of falls to the wayside. Of course, charisma, incredible, because I mean, you're going to be in situations where you're going to have to talk with people. That's kind of half of the game. So having more stuff that needs intelligence is always good, because having someone intelligent in your party is always fun. Got the infuse item thing, which it's kind of like the main thing of a artificer that you take to be different than other magic classes. There's a decent amount of There's a decent amount of infusions, and they're all quite cool. I mean, they're generally just power ups for battle for a lot of them, bar like a couple. The main thing is this, the replicating the magic item. the other stuff could be useful to either buffing you or your party, and having early game some of these abilities is pretty decent. Notable as this one, I quite like, which effectively gives you a +1 to your attack and damage, which effectively makes it a +1. Um, but also just means you don't have to worry about ammo, which some groups don't do, caring about ammo, but I kind of feel like it's necessary. It puts a little bit of a money sink on ranged casters, which really only the wizard gets if you get rid of this. But yeah, this is the major thing that it can be quite useful. I mean, for example, Bag of Holding is the one that jumps out to me. Having this straight away, well, not straight away, but second level, is insane. These Goggles of the Night can like deal with a lot of like I guess problems with being a human or a dragonborn really. But like this Bag of Holding is just, it's something that a lot of, at least in my experience of playing games for about, I'd say about 5 maybe 6 years, and watching stuff like High Rollers, Critical Role, Dimension 20 to a certain extent, although they do kind of their own thing. Bag of Holding is almost needed at some point because of all the stuff you're gonna have. And don't get me wrong, these other things are quite interesting. Having access to the ability to make like poisons, acids, this might come up. There's a decent amount of narrative behind like maybe being a chef that has one of these as their thing. They're like a chef artificer. Well, I mean, they're an artificer that just has a hobby of doing being a chef, and this can be quite useful. Like narratively, this gives so much you can do, and it gives you a lot of um changeability because these can be changed decently quickly. I think it's like uh I swear you could do them really quickly. It's oh, you could whenever you level. It's decently quickly. That's fine. Then you got your specialist. I won't talk too much about that. That probably will be another video where I go into the different subclasses and what I believe, what I think about them. That's a much longer video though, because there's a lot more subclasses than there are obviously classes. But I don't know. Maybe it might be a similar time because there's not going to be as much to talk about. Then there's this one, the right tool for the job. This one's quite interesting because this one, in fact, actually, this is what I talked about before, thinking it was a different ability. I thought this one was it, but no, this is just making tinkering stuff. This is the ability I was talking about earlier. Again, this is rambling, so it's going to be wrong a bunch of times. Um, this one's quite interesting because it's, as I said before, being able to get these tools and artisan tools is pretty cool. Basic, basic, everyone gets it. Specialist feature, again, not going to talk about that. This one, effectively, what's interesting about this class is it's intelligence based, and it kind of does a job of being that jack of all trades in your group, or at least being decently good at a fair amount of stuff. But it's not a bard and it's not a rogue. It's actually intelligence, which frankly I think intelligence should be the the base for being really good at a lot of stuff. I always found it a bit weird that bards get that, but it's just always been a thing since however long I've been playing, so I haven't really questioned it too much. Flash of Genius. You can use a reaction whenever your creature you see, use a reaction. That's quite handy. Just it's kind of like a pseudo bardic inspiration, but more reliable on what you're gonna give. But maybe the high rolls on a bardic inspiration are gonna be better. It's quite interesting. I don't know how much that comes up because I don't know the timing restriction on that. If it's like a paladin smite where you can see the roll and then you can choose to, if they fail, you can choose to use it, I think it'll get a lot of use. If it's not like that, which I think reading through the rules, I think you need to specify that. Then it's going to get, yes, less use. But it'll still get some use. I mean, if it's a very important role, just going like, aha, I have an idea, say it like this, and it giving them like a +3, maybe a +5 to their role it could be quite useful. I mean, it can change like rolling a 14, which on average, if you're going for a hard roll, that's probably not going to succeed, and it could change it to like a 18 or a 19, which most of the time will succeed unless you're going for something borderline impossible. At least in our games. Again, everything I say, I have to preface with at least in our games, because at the end of the day, I only have that experience. I've watched a couple of videos, but generally I feel like they have the same thing as me, but I couldn't tell you 100%. Next you got magic item adept. I never know how to say it. This one effectively just means that you're not going to get screwed over by the fact that you have all these items that you're going to want to attune to. And you'll see this later, I think, because I think the capstone ability is a very similar thing to this. And this is a very interesting ability, because I don't think this really ever comes up, at least in the games I've seen, where you can craft a magic item and it takes you less time, and it costs you less gold. But I'll be honest, I don't really ever see in my campaign or in other campaigns people actively capturing or actively creating, their own magic items. A lot of the time they just find them in like chests, or they're given to them by a god. It's a narrative thing. But then again, Artificer is one of those ones that I've very rarely seen. I've seen it once used in one of Rustage's D&D things. He does an Isekai D&D. But with that one, I didn't see much of it because I haven't caught up with it, and he's only just appeared. And I don't think he's this level yet, because 10th level is pretty high for most games. From what I've experienced, most games that aren't streamed and stuff are normally ending around 15, 12. Normally 12, honestly. I'm a big fan of higher fantasy, so I'd probably try and push it a bit higher. But it's an interesting ability. I think it could come up if they just need a narrative reason why they can get an item that they want, but they don't want it to seem like oh look, they need this item, and then they just go to a random magic store and they find that item up for sale for like 200 gold or something. I think it could be used decently. Spell storing item. Well, I haven't read this one yet, but let me check. Store an item, store a spell in simple or martial weapon, or an item that can be used as a focus. You store a first or second level artificer spell that requires an action to cast. You don't need to have it prepared, that's quite good. They can take an action to use the spell. Okay. And they can use that equal to twice your proficient intelligence modifier. That's quite useful, because it means you've got access to a second level spell that they can do as an action for probably at this point 10 times before you have to do it again. Now, I think that's quite interesting. My worry would be at 11th level, you're getting to the higher level magics. So, I can't off the top of my head think about it, but what level magic would you have? 11th level, you'd have. Oh, you'd only have 3rd level. That's actually not that bad. In fact, that kind of seems really good. I kind of like this because what you can do with it is it's kind of a buff to your martial classes in a way, because you can give these martial classes access to a spell. I'm putting something like, I don't know if the Artificer gets any healing spells. Let me just double check. If you could put a healing spell in it, obviously obviously you would still have to use an action, which isn't great. I mean, that's why healing words is so good, because you don't need to use your action for it. But you can get cure wounds, which it would come up. It could mean that like if your healer goes down, which probably is either you or a cleric, druid, or bard that you have in your group, or like certain subclasses of sorcerer and warlock. But it might be you. I mean, stuff like this isn't bad. Like some of these abilities are pretty decent. So yeah, I really like this. I think it gives not just you to a certain extent, but because frankly, I don't think I'd be using this on myself because I have access to spells anyway. But giving this to a martial class to just give them maybe a decent ranged option, or a buff spell, or like a healing spell, or even giving this to your wizard to give him a healing spell is quite interesting, especially since at least in our games, because we don't do short rests often, but we do a lot of long combats, like long dungeons, which means that resources in general for spells, especially for the wizards, where I'll get to this whenever I get to the wizard ones, but they kind of only have one thing that they can do, and it's spells. And don't get me wrong, spells are good, but you eventually run out of spells. And so giving them something like this, so that they can use their, like a first or second level spell, about 10 times, isn't that bad. I'm not sure if wizards at this point get access to their like signature spell, but I don't think they do. I think that's much later. Because I think it is like a second level or third level spell that they just get to be able to do over and over again. Ability score improvement, basic. I'll be honest, like, recently, this is a bit of a tangent. I've realised how good a feat is. Because I rolled a decently good, like, stats on my character for one of the campaigns I'm in at the moment. And because of it, I didn't really need to up anything. Like, I was playing a rogue, I had my dex already really, really high, and the first ability score improvement I did was to buff it to being the highest. And then, other than dex, there isn't really anything else you need. The only thing I did, the thing is, I already had all of these pretty high rolls, and I kind of went, because there's two ways you can go with that. You can either go, nah, this is too high to be fun. And I understand the logic behind that. But what I've gone for is a different way, which is I'm going to take feats, and I'm not going to really care about how good they are. I'm just going to care about the narrative behind them. So I was like, I want my rogue to be an assassin. So I took I think it's called like athletic feat. It effectively gives me a climbing speed and gives me this ability to jump, because I want them to kind of be able to, kind of like a Batman, jump from roof to roof, climb on stuff, kind of be acrobatic. So that was quite useful. And then I took like Poisoner, which really isn't good because poison damage, if you didn't already know, is kind of the worst damage. It's not got the most resistances, but it's got the most immunities, which is even worse. Because you got like undead, almost all of them are immune to poison. Constructs, almost all of them are immune to poison. Elementals, almost all of them are immune to poison. So it just becomes a slog if you're using poison damage. But I took it because it made sense for an assassin to have access to poisons. And it's come up occasionally. The problem with the poisoner feat is you pay a lot of money for the poisons. I understand poisons in general in base D&D are quite expensive for doing frankly nothing, and a lot of them are like not contact poisons, because in fairness a lot of poisons aren't contact poisons, but they're like ingestion or inhale, which means I'm kind of just, it's a lot of money, and I don't, we get a lot of money in that campaign. It's just, it doesn't feel like it's worth, because you get like an extra 2d6, but they have to fail like a saving throw, and when you're fighting stuff, especially if because I think it's a con save if I remember correctly. A con save is a lot of the time you'll find enemies that have high con saves. So it does, to me, it doesn't really come up, but it's fun narratively for me to have it, and that's kind of just what I'm trying with this rogue. Anyway, sorry, back to this. Magic item savant just ups your magic item again because at this point they kind of expect you to have at least had a couple magic items that aren't your infusions, which makes sense. You got ability score improvements. Ability score improvement again, standard. Specialist thing, we're not going through. Magic item master, again, they just realise that the higher up, especially these later levels, you're kitted out with magic items. And you don't really want to be in a situation where you have to choose between using your class ability or having this really awesome item. Because it just kind of makes the class not really a thing then. And then finally, this capstone ability, which probably 99% of people will not get to. I've never gotten to level 20. We were going to do a one-shot level 20, but it just fell through. But it's important to have a look at it just to see how impactful it is. Effectively, this is just get a +6 to your saving throws, which is really, really good. And then this one effectively just gives you the half orc ability, but you have to reaction use it, and it will knock off one of your infusions, which is pretty interesting because you're technically weakening yourself, but I don't feel like, I could be wrong. Let me have a look. Let me have a look at some of these later ones. Increase walking speed, common move against our will, gauntlets that probably aren't being used. I do like that though, the rocket fist. That's quite useful, functionally, like as a narrative thing. But even this highest like level prerequisite, it's not incredible. So you wouldn't mind losing that or like any of these really. And probably by the time you're getting knocked down, unless you've just been hit by like a huge one-shot attack, you probably used a lot of the charge stuff, and you put on one of your things, so you can probably remove it without any problem. I don't know how much it would come up. No, I don't think it'd ever come up because you'd have to attune, and attune takes a while. So yeah, overall, Artificer, I really like it. I really like you get you a lot of utility, and I feel like it's a quite powerful half-caster that I think in the right setting can fit in perfectly. It can do a lot of stuff. It can be a pseudo jack of all trades. It can help the team. Interestingly, like as a support, but as a support more so before the battle. As in, you can give like your level 2 party, magically infused items, which is quite helpful. I think it drops off a bit later on, unless you can start stacking it on magic items, but I don't think you can. I'll double check. Yeah. No, it has to be a non-magical object. That's a shame. It would be a bit overpowered if they didn't do that, but yeah, you get a decent access to spells, and I kind of feel, even though you're a half caster and you're definitely going to fall behind full casters in, levels of your spells, you make up for it in the fact that you have access to all of these infusions that you can do. You can switch the infusions on the fly. Not switch what type you know, but like switch what things are imbued. You have access to a bunch of like spell storing, which means that you kind of have this thing going where you can just, sure, you're not hitting them with high up meteors or time stop, but you're okay in whatever your specialist is, based on the subclasses. In addition, you have access to a load of low-level spells that other halfcasters don't really get. You don't get that with the ranger, you don't get that with the paladin, you don't get that with... I don't know if you can really call a warlock a halfcaster, but you kind of do with a warlock, but not to this extent. Overall, I think it's just a really good class. Can be used in a lot of stuff. I won't go into the subclasses, but like Battlesmith, for example, could be used to be a front line and have a protector. This one, the Artillerist, I think that's how you say it, can be used as a decent like backline ranged combatant. Alchemist, I feel like is a bit more of a utility one. I haven't checked into that one before. And Armorer is quite interesting because you get to play as Iron Man. I know that that's a bit of like a simple explanation about what that subclass is, but it's just cool. You get to play as Iron Man. You get medium armor, so you're decent compared to like a wizard or a sorcerer. Overall, yeah, I'm a big fan of it. Next we got Barbarian, and Barbarian I'm kind of less of a fan of. So, Barbarian, notable things. Got the highest hit die out of anyone. Has the most health. Problem is, health kind of doesn't matter. Like, it does matter in the sense that, health is a resource that keeps you alive. Kind of a stupid thing to say, but it is. But you get to a point later on, and I don't think this is just my games because I believe this is the base D&D thing. You get to a point where the enemies are going to be hitting you, specifically boss enemies, but basic enemies as well. A lot of them are going to be glass cannons. They're going to be hitting you, and they're going to be doing a lot of damage. And really, you're not really counting how much health you have. It's how many hits you can take. I think it becomes later levels. It becomes much of more of a bigger difference. So like, well, I'll try and explain it in a better way. At level 1, it could be that a wizard can take 2 hits from this enemy on average, and then they drop. And a barbarian probably takes 4, maybe 5 hits. But I feel like later on, even though the health of the barbarian is going up by a lot more on average than the wizard is, the amount of hits that each of them can take on average to attacks will lessen. Like the difference will lessen. So it might be that a wizard can take 3 hits now, and the barbarian can take 4. Or like, wizard can still do 2, but instead of being able to take 5 now, he can only take 4. I feel like that happens the higher up you go, and this health thing becomes less and less of a need, and less of a problem. Even though the wizard will probably not have a high con, and you will probably have con as like probably the second stat that you go into. Anyway, its main ability, Rage. It's kind of my first problem with a barbarian. As much as I love the idea of it, this like berserker running through the field, taking hits but not caring about it, and hitting you wildly with attacks. Rage is the biggest thing you're gonna get, and it's the only real thing that you're gonna get that they're gonna do stuff about. And because of the restriction here of like the rage, it kind of becomes a one-trick pony, and that's my problem with it. So generally, bonuses to strength, bonuses to damage and hits. I'm not going to go through it precisely, but you effectively become resistant to non-magical. You become resistant to effectively like martial attacks, really. Bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, that's effectively your swords, your hammers, your bows, everything that isn't a spell, really, unless it's like a magical weapon that hits for different kinds of damage. But generally, you effectively, when raged, double your health to melee attacks and arrows and stuff like that. You can't concentrate on a spell. Doesn't come up a lot unless you multi-class. Lasts a minute. That's normally enough for a fight unless it's a long boss fight. You have to attack every turn or take damage. That's fine. I mean, that's probably what you're going to be doing. You got this unarmored defense. Your armor is 10 plus dex plus con. This is the biggest thing, really. Probably from base, in my opinion. I don't think it's controversial. This counteracts any point in trying to have any of these light or medium armor. Or shields, it's different, but you don't really need medium. You don't really need light, because at this point, this will be better, like by a long shot. Because on average, let's say you roll standard away, your second highest ability is going into this. So if you look at standard array, you've got standard array 5e. So if you look at this, 15, 14, 13, 12, right? So you got your 10 from this. Probably your next highest thing is going into either con or dex. Doesn't matter here. Let's say dex. So you put your 14 in that, you get a +2. So you already got 12 AC. Then you put in the 13, you get a +1. So you got 13 AC. Doesn't seem like much, right? But the thing is, this scales so much better than these two ever scale. Because these are reliant on you getting ability score improvements, which you always will be doing. Whereas these two, at some point, quite early on in most of my games, it effectively becomes, God, I hope the DM gives me magical armor, because you've already gotten to the top of these two. It's a bit different in my opinion when you have heavy armor, because heavy armor, the plate part, which is the best armor you can get, it's very expensive. But these two, it's very quick. You get these. And this, I mean, it scales to having +5/+5. And if you're playing standard away, you're not going to get +5/+5 until very near the end. But you're going to get pretty high. Next, you got danger sense. Now, this one's interesting because it gives you advantage on dex saves against things you can see, which is quite good, because a lot of the time you'll be able to see it coming. Even if it's a bit of a surprise, realistically you see it. So I don't feel like there's an argument to say that the DM will not give it you, but it's not you use a reaction to do it. If it was use a reaction, then obviously you don't get a reaction, you're surprised. But it's just if you see it happen. So having advantage on dex saves is quite useful, because it means that you're more likely that if you get hit by a fireball, the fireball's only doing half damage to you. And especially if you're not taking the subclass, the best, really, in my opinion, the best if you're just going strictly for like being the best in combat, Totem Warrior. Unless you've gone Totem Warrior later on, you're going to be taking full damage from fireballs and spells and stuff. So the fact you can limit that a bit is pretty decent. Then you got Reckless Attack. Reckless Attack is a bit interesting to me. I'm in two minds on it, because on one hand, you've got it where if you know that a boss is definitely going to hit you, because a lot of bosses, at least later on in my experience, they can have such a high to hit because they're bosses that your AC, which will be lower than obviously the heavy armor dudes or mainly just the heavy armor dudes, it's going to be so high to hit that you've borderline guaranteed to be hit. Maybe like if they roll like a 3 or a 2, and obviously a 1, it might not hit. But in those situations, it feels like it's just better to reckless attack, because you know you're going to get hit, and you may as well guarantee that you hit, or at least increase your chances by a fair amount. But I feel like earlier on, when you get this, there's an argument to say that you don't want to be using it, because if there's loads of little dudes and you're at the level where you don't have a lot of health to take it, giving them all advantage just doesn't seem good, to just guarantee you kill or guarantee you hurt somebody. I don't know. I like the ability because it makes sense narratively for a barbarian. They don't have like technique. They're not going to be like a fighter that attacks in a way that they're ready to block whenever something comes up. But I don't know. I also don't particularly like the restriction of strength. This is... I really should have talked about this really near the end, but the fact that all of these abilities are around strength, it fits the one archetype of like a berserker or a barbarian, but there is also that other sort of archetype of like badass like person jumping in with 2 swords, flailing them with like a madman, not caring about the consequences, just mowing through people. That I think you could definitely do with a barbarian, but this doesn't help you in this aspect. And there is an argument to say that because Dex is so good, it would just make them so powerful and everyone would choose Dex. I just wish you could have the option of that. Because if I'm getting a bunch of attacks, I imagine a reckless attack and I have 2 weapons, it just means I get another... Oh no, it's first attack on your turn. That's a shame. But I feel like, I don't know, the Dex thing I feel like could be done. Maybe with a subclass. I kind of want it just to be like a base thing. Maybe you get a debuff if you choose Dex. I don't know. Then you got this one, the optional features. I'm going to count them because I think a lot of the optional features are just going to be added. And I do like them a lot, most of them. I think, actually, no, in fairness, all of them. Because this one's kind of helps with one of the problems I have with Barbarian, which is that they have nothing they can do outside of combat. And increasingly, I know it's started off as just a dungeon fighting one, but I mean, people don't play it like that. They play it as if there's a bit of like narrative there as well, and you want utility stuff you can do out of combat. This one kind of like a cop out in my opinion. Just gives you a proficiency bonus, like a proficiency in one of your skills. That's okay. It's not incredible. It doesn't really impact stuff that much. Got ability score, that's fine. Extra attack, kind of needed on it. I don't know off the top of my head whether Reckless, because it says make your first attack, and this says you can attack twice instead of 1 whenever you make an attack action. Is this making an attack? I think it's ruled that way a lot of the time. And I think the latest Unearthed effectively says that is said in a way that more or less guarantees that this will be it from the future. Also, funny enough, that one also has reaction. You can do an attack, which is quite cool. And the reaction attack, if they leave your zone of control, if you would reckless on your turn, because it lasts until your next turn, means you get advantage on that as well, which is quite cool. Fast movement, kind of needed, because you want to be getting into the combat as soon as possible, and you don't want to be in a situation where they kind of just like go, okay, you've attacked me, disengage, move, kind of thing. You can substitute like not being able to hit them by just like having a ranged weapon on you, but unless you choose that latest giant subclass, you're not getting all your bonuses on it. Next, you got Feral Instinct. There seems to be advantage in initiative rolls. Initiative rolls, if you're surprised at the beginning of combat, and on, you can act normally in your first turn. But only if you enter your rage before doing it. This is quite good. Increasingly, we're having situations where, at least in my games, where we get surprised. And having something like this is pretty cool. I quite like that. It doesn't solve, again, the problem I brought up before, where I feel like it needs some more narrative reasons why they have out of combat reasons, out of combat abilities. Because out of combat abilities are kind of needed. This, quite useful, means you can get into the fight even easier. I like the idea that they're not restricted in that way to like be stuck outside the combat. If the enemy's really far away, you can now go, if you wanted to, you go like bonus action, I rage, I move half my movement, half my speed, and then I move, and I get like effectively 1.5% of my speed to get into the combat. Also, you could just dash. I don't know if you dashed, then bonus action did this, whether you get 3 times your normal speed, because would it be half your speed when dashing? Interesting thing. If it's true, that'd be quite powerful. Brutal critical. It's cool when it happens. Like it's one of those like Pog. This has happened. Oh, I can't believe I said Pog. But like this is it becomes a big thing at the table or online if you do get a crit. But I don't know if it's particularly good as an ability. I kind of want more abilities that get. Sorry, I had to move my cat there. Get like more like cool things that happen just all the time that you can activate. I don't really like these abilities that are just sort of passive stuff that doesn't really affect 90% of the game, because like it just doesn't come up 90% of the time. Then you got Relentless Rage. This one's interesting because really the only reason I knew about this ability is because it's come up occasionally in stuff I've watched, and it does help to keep them in combat for a bit. The problem with this is they hit you, say, and this happens a lot if you're fighting loads of enemies or one that has a lot of multi-attacks. There's no reason why, if you get hit, you get down to 0, you make the DC, that they just don't attack you again, knock you down again, and then just get back. I don't know. It comes up. It's quite cool, actually. I think of the abilities we've seen, I quite like it. I don't know how impactful it is. Bearing in mind it's an 11th level ability. Critical 2 dice, not really a difference. Again, don't particularly like these passive abilities in general for barbarians because they need more stuff they can do other than just rage and attack. I think that's the biggest problem you'll see with a lot of martial classes and some half-casters, that you just feel like the magic casters, they're casting spells, they're buffing, they're healing, they're dropping down meteors, obviously not until later on, but they're dropping fireballs, they're casting Ray of Frost. And as a martial class, you're just going, I attack with my weapon. Now, obviously, narratively, you can come up with ways you're doing that, like, oh, I strategically run towards the enemy, and then just as they try and attack me, I slice in their armpits, so as to try and like injure their arm or something. But at the end of the day, you have the bar of having to narratively do that, whereas the bar for magic casters, well, they already have the cool part from magic. They already have this sort of like stepping point to come up with cooler things, whereas you have to start from the lower point of just an attack. So I feel like you need to give the martial classes more stuff they can do. This one, realistically in fights, a lot of them aren't lasting more than a minute. There's occasional ones that would, but in my opinion, you're not going to get lots that last more than a minute. So I don't know how much this comes up. Brutal Critical, again, don't like it. I feel like you could replace Brutal Critical with an ability that they had that they could do that would be fun. I've always suggested something like, because they're all about like they taking hits and they don't really care about it, having stuff where it's like when you take a hit through like sheer force of will or something, you get like a buff to your next attack. Like every time you get hit, half of the damage. I don't know, like something where like it adds rolls to your next attack based on like your primal rage or something. Just like some narrative reason why them taking the hits and having this huge health pool like helps them in some variety. I also feel like they should have some form of healing, but that's more of like a personal thing that I think they should have, just because they feel like they're the tanky class. Them and maybe Paladin fall into the most tanky classes, and maybe it's a MMO part of me that wants there to be at least a way you can play it as a proper tank, but I kind of want there to be tanking abilities. If I want there to be a reason why you pick a martial class and it has this sort of this one up on the magic classes. And I'm sure like they technically have the abilities to do long-term sustained damage, whereas a wizard will eventually run out of spells, and all the other magic classes will again run out of spells. The martial classes have the ability to have this sustained level of damage that is higher on average than a magic caster. Although there's an argument that's not true, with like cantrips also getting stronger, but that's beside the point. Next we have like Indomitable Might. Could have said that wrong. I don't know. It's pretty useful. It means that borderline you're never really failing a strength check. Well, like an easy one. I like it because it kind of shows the progress that you've gotten at a level 18, having the ability to just like mundane tasks where you would have had to have rolled. And when I'm talking mundane tasks, I'm talking like lifting a boulder that isn't huge, but is like, for an average person, it would be a sustained task. But because you're level 18 and you're this barbarian and you're all about strength, the fact that you can effectively guarantee it is pretty decent. And the final one is quite interesting, because I think it's the only situation where it can boost your maximum for your stats. But in general, this is just pretty good, because increasing your strength, increasing your con, so it's increasing your chances to hit. It's also increasing your health. It's also increasing your AC, because con goes into AC. So it's just generally pretty decent, giving you a +2 to hit. It gives you a +2 to your con, and then obviously retroactively adds +2 for every level. Gives you +2 to your AC, which could come up. I think if you're not at this point got max in those two stats, then either you're playing a pretty low start in terms of fantasy setting, or you've just been buying a load of feats and stuff. For most of the time, most people, I'd say about 80% of people are going to have 24 in both of those, which is quite cool. So in general, for Barbarian, I have less to talk about than I did with Artificer, but that's because Artificer just had access to a lot of things, and it was a bit more of a unique one. I think with Barbarian, I said it before earlier, but it just needs some stuff that it can do that helps people get into the roleplay aspect, because that's a big thing that you need to get people into. It's kind of half the game, and the way you sort of do that is by giving them utility stuff, and not just like, I have my proficiency in this one extra thing. I'm thinking more like, here's something I can do that you guys can't do, that narratively I can use as a role playing element. Like the artificer, it's like, oh, don't worry, like we're in a situation where we need, I don't know, we need acid stat, or for some reason we needed milk stat. Not a great example, but it's the first thing that came to my mind. And you're like, oh well, don't worry about it. I have this alchemy jug that I can infuse this jug, make it an alchemy jug, and then we can use that. Barbarian doesn't really have access to that stuff. And from a brief look, skim read of all of its subclasses, they don't help with that. Another demerit to the Barbarian, in my opinion, is it doesn't have access to anything other than Rage. It's got Rage, it's got Reckless. That's really it in terms of things it can do in the fight. So you're stuck to, I attack them while enraged. I Reckless. That's it. I think this is kind of a problem to a lesser extent in other martial classes, but it is still there in other martial classes. That I feel like you're in a situation where you just don't feel like you're doing as much, even though you probably are, because you're there tanking damage, you're there, effectively protecting the spellcasters. But I don't feel like it feels as good, because they're doing all the work, and you're stuck there doing a basic attack, and that's it. Nothing fancy to it. It's not as if like with like how most spells go, where it's like, oh, you got hit by one of my attacks. Now there's a percentage chance if you fail the saving throw that you're poisoned, or I don't know, fall asleep, or at least knocked over. It just doesn't have that. Overall, I haven't played Barbarian, so I'm not. Well, I haven't played Barbarian for a long period. I did for like a session, but that fell through. But overall, I'm not a big fan of the fact that all the subclasses really do is modify Rage. And if Rage was a really complex ability, then maybe I'd be fine with it. But it means that you're stuck in a situation where you're just doing a basic attack over and over and over again. From what I've been told, like 4th edition tried to solve this by giving like martial classes, like, from what I've been told, and this is all secondhand information, no attack was just basic attack. It was like, I'm gonna do uppercut of, I don't know, fucking giant slaying or something. Like, all of them had like special names and they did stuff. But I think people didn't like it because it became too much of a video gamey thing. But I kind of wish they had taken some of that and just maybe toned down other bits. Next we have Bard. Now, anyone that knows me that knows how I do in D&D will say that I don't like Bard. And it's kind of a running joke, but I don't mind Bard. It's just never been interesting to me. Not because of any sort of abilities it has. And this isn't a knock on the actual class. It's just a personal thing for me on that one. But I'll try and be like not biased at all with this, because I mean the abilities themselves are interesting. I've just never been interested in making a bard. D8 kind of standard on this point. Bardic Inspiration. This is a big thing of the class, but I guess because of the spells and also some of the other stuff it gets, it isn't the only thing for the class, which I think is a big, a very important thing to bring up. This is an ability, bonus action. You give someone the Bardic Inspiration. Starts off as a D6, it gets higher later on. and effectively any role. I'm not sure if there's a role that is an ability, attack roll, or saving throw, but I think that could say all roll. Um, so you can wait and you can decide. You know what? I've rolled like a 12. That's not gonna hit, or that's not gonna succeed, and just go. I'm gonna roll my bardic inspiration, and you roll a d6. You add it to the roll. It's pretty handy. I think it's pretty cool in general. It's a nice little support ability and kind of fits into what I feel like a bard is, which is a lot of the time very supporty. Spells, everyone knows that. Importantly, it can do ritual casting, which will come up. Um, Not everyone can do it. I think it's clerics, druids, probably wizards. I wouldn't be surprised if sorcerers can do it. Warlocks can do it. Fair amount can. I don't think half-casters can. This is also quite good. I like stuff that can change what your spellcasting focus is, because it means that you're not using the same thing as in the class, which I feel like is just cool. This kind of defines what the class has been in a lot of games I've played. It's the jack of all trades. Um, you can add half your proficiency bonus around down to any ability you make that doesn't already include your proficiency bonus, which just means you can kind of do anything. Which can be a double-edged sword, honestly, because you can be in a situation where, not in terms of like you like for you specifically, but your like narrative experience with your group can be in a situation where it's like, well, I'll do it, even though you don't have proficiency in it, and it's like, well, there's other people that have spec'd into that we kind of hope you don't step on their toes because that can lessen their experience. I haven't had that come up, but I could see a situation where it could. Song of Rest is a very interesting ability because it just makes it so you heal more, which can come up. As I sort of alluded to before, my group don't do a lot of short rests. I think because in a lot of games, we're put in situations where we feel like we need to get to the next destination fast or something's going to happen. Like, we've got a cult and the cult have kidnapped somebody and they're doing chanting for a ritual or something. And can we, if we're trying to be like decently good people, can we really say, I know that there's this chanting and I know that they're going to sacrifice someone, but I think I'm just going to wait like an hour out here and have a short rest? It just doesn't feel right to us a lot of the time. This one, optional ability, I hadn't actually had a look at yet. So you can just make you heal more or deal more damage. It's good, but I mean, the heal part, it's not really going to come up much because realistically, as I said before, with like I alluded to with the health thing, health becomes less of how much you have left and more, can you get me up before my turn so I can do my turn. So really, one health becomes effectively the same as like, like 10 health. Cause when the average boss can do is like 15 or something. And that's a bit of an understatement, honestly. Bard College subclass. I'm not going to talk about that today. Third level, it just makes you more of a jack of all trades. You get the expertise thing. Really, anything that gets us expertise, you kind of know can be a jack of all trades. Not as good as Bard. I think Bard's the best at it. People will say Rogue, but I just feel like early on getting this, literally called jack of all trades, just makes it better. But expertise can be quite good. Can borderline guarantee a lot of stuff. A lot of people I know put it into like persuasion and stuff, which can be good for like a face or the person who would be talking all the time. Bardic versatility. You reach a level in this that grants you can do the following to represent a change in focus. Okay, I mean that's just I don't mind any of these abilities. You'll see a lot of them on magic casters. They're just like, hey, did you make a bad decision when you were choosing your spells and you kind of stuck with them? You don't worry, you're not actually stuck with them. This one less so because it's just a cantrip, but it's the same sort of thing when it comes to skills. When you're like, my character actually uses acrobatics more than they use persuasion. I think can I switch it to persuasion? And most of the time the DMs would have just allowed you before, but now there's actually a narrative way in which you can do it. This, I mean, its scaling is always good. I mean, what you can kind of see here, not even counting the spells, but what you can kind of see here is even without the spells, and the spells do become part of it, you have to account for that when you're thinking about a martial class, that they should get more because they don't get spells as an additional thing. Even without the spells added onto the bard has more than just its inspiration thing. And the barbarian doesn't really. This, incredible. Just getting all of them back is pretty decent. Again, because my group doesn't really use short rests much, effectively you can just take away this bit. But still, it's very good for the average player. Counter Charm. Now, I haven't played a bard before, but everyone I've talked to says that this is horrendous. It's sort of just like on my turn, you can't charm or frighten me. Well, that's fine. Well, the boss is just not going to attack you then. Now, obviously, that is a bit of a metagaming thing, but surely you're saying something when you do this. It's a performance, so it specifically says it ends if you get silenced. So I don't think it's too much of a jump. This is cool. Everyone's gonna have those. Song of Rest going up. At this point, it's becoming less and less relevant. But this always helps. It could mean you get another hit in. This is pretty decent. Again, scaling. This is still relevant at the end of the day. D10 is always relevant. Getting extra, like, on average, like 6. It's useful. It's very useful. Expertise, again, very useful. At this point in time, you've effectively become really, really good at a lot of stuff. Which is handy. Magical secrets. This one's quite interesting because it means you get access to spells that you don't normally get access to, which could like shore up a couple of weaknesses you have. I don't know if the bard particularly has many weaknesses. Maybe lack of spells that don't just target a person. I know someone in my group had a bit of a problem of like not having got access to a lot of spells that hit like monsters because they focused heavily into people related things. And to a certain extent, you kind of have to cherry pick to find non-people related things. So maybe that helps. I don't think it's come up much, but it might come up. Again, it's decent. It'll always add up. I mean, having an extra 10 health isn't bad at 13th. But in general, it'll have less and less effect because you can roll a 1 at the end of the day. There's no the problem with it is there's no like the lower limit is 1 always, no matter what. Magical secrets, similar to that one, you just get more spells. This becomes quite interesting when you're getting higher level spells. This, again, scaling. We're not going to have as much to talk about with the bard because the bard, unlike, because it's a full magic class, a lot of its features are a bit more of a, there's less of them because you get access to magic, but like not a ton less, and a lot of them are just scaling stuff, especially with this one. Ability skill improvement, extra Song of Rest. I think Song of Rest can be quite useful if you're doing a lot of short rests, because then it becomes, and this might be why I have a lower opinion on it, not a bad opinion, but a lower opinion that I'm kind of dismissing it, is this. If you are doing a load of short rests, say like 2 to 3, maybe even 4, that means every roll you're getting an extra 4d12 at this point of healing. I mean, that adds up. That becomes useful and relevant. Especially when at that point you're not going to have access to a plethora of hit die to use. So maybe having it that one of your hit die, like potentially for like a wizard, is like you're using 3. So yeah, I can see that's use actually now that I've thought about it. And magical secrets again. The thing is with magical secrets is it really helps you become this more so a jack of all trades, not just in skills but in general abilities. Because you can have access to anything now, stuff that you would never expect this class to have, and that can shore up weaknesses in your group that you just don't have access to. Like, I've played campaigns before where we've had no healer. Like, we've had no real person that has access to, like, healing word and cure wounds and stuff. The closest we had was, like, a ranger. And they don't want to be using their spells on cure wounds. They want to be using their spells on buff their bow and their arrows and stuff. Or putting, like, a buff on the person a buff to you on the person. And then this one, you see this occasionally with the monk as well. It's good, but one use when you're that low is it's useful. No, I tell you what, I take it back. It is useful. Overall, Bard, taking my biases away, very useful. It's probably one of those ones where I think the only other one I'd say would be like. No, I think this would be the only class where I'm like, you need to show up you're not really sure what your other people are going to play, but you need to be the person who shores up their like comp. So although there isn't like MMO style tank DPS healer, to a certain extent you need somebody that can be the front line, that can take the hits. You need somebody who can be backline and do the damage, or also melee, but most of the time it's the backline because spells are just generally more powerful than weapons. And you need somebody there to have fast healing, realistically. I say need, but it's just optimal, really. I don't know, optimal sounds wrong as well. It's preferred. That's probably a better word. And other than maybe like being the tank front line, all of them are kind of stuff that you can do with this. I think Swords Bard can maybe take the front line, but it's a bit iffy in my opinion. Next is Cleric. Now, Cleric is probably my favourite class. It might be Druid, but it's very close. Cleric's really good because it can be anything. I guess more so than. It's not as good at support as Bard, but it's better at tanking and it's better at range DPS depending on what you want to do, and it's better at heal support. Maybe not like buff support, although it does get access to Bless. It might be equivalent. It might just be better as like an all-rounder in combat, but not out of combat. I think I agree. I think I'd go with that. Yeah, I mean it's great. It gets D8 again standard. Gets access to medium shield again standard. Gets spellcasting. I'm not going to go through that. It's the same. It's a wisdom user, which is quite interesting. By the way, before the bard obviously was a charisma user. Wisdom quite useful. Probably the second most. It's not up there as he's not like Dex or Charisma in my opinion, as in like being really good stats, but it's pretty decent. One of the first one we've seen that you pick your Dominion immediately kind of makes sense because you can't really be a cleric of nothing. Well, you could, but you'd have to like narratively come up with a reason why. But like the average person, they're not like a cleric and then they find a god that they particularly like. It's more so that they're a cleric of somebody and then they get divine power. It's going to be hard not to mention the subclasses because this one, more than all of them, is very affected by its subclass. So I'll touch on it briefly, but not go into like abilities and stuff. Channel Divinity. Base just on Turn Undead. I'll be honest, Turn Undead's not coming up much. With what CR they have to be, to get like the destruction thing that comes later, and just having it be like AoE frighten on a specific kind of enemy, it doesn't come up much in my opinion. At least it hasn't. It hasn't in my games. Harness Divine Power is pretty decent, but I think generally, and this is why I brought up the subclasses having a bit more of an importance. Generally, the Channel Divinity that you get from each of your subclasses is vastly more useful. Vastly more useful than Turn Undead and Harness Divine Power. If you're stuck in a situation where your Channel Divinity will not work as much as getting like a spell back, that's fine. Maybe it comes up. This is more likely to come up with, in my opinion, than Turn Undead. Ever. Even in games like Solasta, where I've been in a situation where a cleric has been surrounded by undead that have been like okay, doesn't really come up. You have ability skill improvement, general. I like this cantrip versatility. We talked about it a bit with the bard. Kind of already had this. I love it because it just means you get more access to like spells. Destroy undead. This is the thing I was talking about before. See, that CR to me, it's so low that it comes up very rarely. Like I'm sure a zombie is CR half or lower, but I don't know. I just never had this come up. I mean, it could come up in your games or something, but it's very rarely come up in mine, so I have a low opinion of it. This is kind of why I've put rambling instead of like this is a detailed review of 5e classes, because I mean if it was a detailed review, I would I'd be having a problem at this point. I'd be having a problem at this point because I have like not got enough skill to really do a detailed review. So yeah, these are all just my personal opinions. Second Channel Divinity. Depending on what Channel Divinity you're using, this might really help you. Divine Feature, again, subclass related thing. But the thing is with this one, more than anything, this matters. Like, this matters a lot. Ability skill improvement. See, I don't think I'm going to have too much to talk about with clerics, because clerics are kind of like the bard in a sense. Like full magic casters, you're gonna have situations where they just don't really have very interesting base abilities. I think the only things that I can sort of mention is, again, I don't think this Destroy Undead, I don't like it that much. I've mentioned that before. Divine Intervention is interesting. Narratively, it's very interesting because it means that you can have roleplay elements with your god, which can be quite pivotal in story stuff. Problem with it is, until later levels, borderline impossible for it actually to work. Kind of like using this ability, but obviously if you're a DM, if you want it to work, you just say it works. And I like that a lot more because I like this as a role playing tool. Maybe you don't have it where it definitely chooses your deity, but maybe have it where it can choose like a divine being of your religion, like an angel, maybe. That'd be interesting. And maybe have it where it only summons your god if the god allows it, or if like you have it at level 20. I think that would be fine, honestly. Destroying Dead again, ability score improvement again. I'm not going to go into these because it's like literally the exact same ability but higher CR. I don't think it really matters, but again, my opinion. Again, all this stuff, improvements to Divine Intervention. This one's going to be a lot quicker than the Bard one, and even the Barbarian one, because the abilities base don't have a lot to like do, and the real uniqueness and the reason I like clerics comes from the god and dominion you choose. I think the big thing with this, and it's done kind of as well with Warlock. The biggest thing with this is you can narratively either come up with a god with your DM or find a god you particularly like and its tenants that you really like. And you can really use that as kind of like a skeleton to build a character around. Like, this god believes in bountiful harvest and the working together of animal and human to build a better world. Like they're a god of harvest or something. I'm thinking of the Theros god from the MTG Theros book, and you can use that as a basis to okay, why would someone follow them? Well, maybe they're a farmer. Maybe they had a experience. Maybe they have a really good bond with animals, and so they want to. They agree with what she's spouting her tenants, and you can really use that as a jumping off point to make a really interesting character. To a certain extent, you can do that with with all the classes. Like, okay, why does he have this rage that he uses in battle? Okay, why does he sing magical songs? What got him into like singing and or like with the artificer? Like, okay, what trained him? But I feel like with cleric and paladin and warlock, you very much, and to a certain extent sorcerer, you very much have it in a bigger capacity for me. I think it's a much bigger thing because you're kind of making another character. You're kind of making two characters. You're kind of making your interpretation of what their god is, or your patron if you're a warlock, and you're also making your own character and how they react to each other to a certain extent. More so with the warlock than the cleric. The cleric, I feel like your god is a bit more of a like unintervening watcher. So I really like the cleric, especially I've talked about the narrative reasons why I like it, especially with all these different subclasses, you get access to different things. For example, if you go life, you'll get access to heavy armor. That's huge. Having heavy armor as a full spellcaster is great. Gives you much more AC, and it means you can kind of take a front line. More so with the war cleric, who effectively becomes a frontline fighter, and you go from either being at the back line, shooting damaging spells, or healing up and buffing the party, to being in a situation where you're at the front, buffing yourself and maybe other people, and maybe having a spiritual weapon that fights by your side. Like, it's such a change to the whole thing. Or you go trickster, or trickery, and in my opinion, that one's a bit iffy. I don't think it's very powerful, but that one's like more focused on light armor and trickery and making illusions and like jumping around, casting spells and stuff. Or you could go like just recently I did a light cleric, and that's very heavily I do as much damage as I physically can. I'm a damage dealer. I do I do loads of damage to the enemy. My healing's kind of secondary. I can do it because I'm a cleric, but my shtick is loads of damage and mitigating people hitting me. Like later on, you can do it to your allies, but early on, it's just like flashbang. If you go at me, you have disadvantage, and I just have loads of spells that I've gotten from fire-based things. That one kind of suffers from being an earlier class, but I still think it was pretty decent. And then, there's all of these ones have their own sort of ability. And that's true to all subclasses, but I feel like it has a really big effect with Cleric. Again, might be biased, I really love Cleric. Druid, as I said before, kind of my second favourite, maybe first. It's very, very close. Probably going to have a similar situation to Clerics because it's a full caster, where, and on the Bard one, where there isn't a lot of abilities it gets. Now, I know I said before that because they're magic casters, they shouldn't get access to as much abilities, and I agree. And you look at this and you go, well, they've done what you've said. They don't have access to a load of abilities. I mean, look at that. There's some bits where there's literally nothing written there. Yes, but I think they only did one half of it. I think they went, these guys don't have access to as many abilities base. Like, when I'm saying abilities, I mean like features. But they didn't do the martial part of it, of upping the martials, so that they had more stuff they can do. It's still not balanced. Anyone you ask about D&D will say that magic is just so much more powerful. And I'm kind of fine with it being slightly more powerful, but I kind of want there to be more stuff. I want to be able to feel like I'm doing something if I'm a martial class. And I don't feel like you get that with fighter. I don't think you get that with barbarian. To a certain extent with monk, rogue's perfectly fine. Anyway, let's go through druid. Druid got D8 on average. Always been a bit surprised that they can get medium armor, but they can. But they won't use armor or shields made of metal, which makes sense narratively. They're druids. I could see an argument to say that if it's unprocessed metal, they probably should be able to use it, but I feel like you could argue that with your DM. Like, you got Wild Shape. Wild Shape's like arguably the biggest ability, and I've heard people say before that it's kind of useless if you're not Moon, that effectively buffs it, but I do disagree. Because I like I like wild shapes for a lot of reasons. I used it a lot when I was playing a druid for scouting. Turn into a spider or turn into a fly later levels, and just scuttling across the top of a cave or something, or like into a castle, and just checking out what's happening in there. It can be very useful. It can be used for infiltrating. It can be used for effectively ablative runes, which isn't bad if you're stuck in a situation. Obviously, it's not going to be as good as if you went Signal of the Moon, but it still has loads of uses. And because you got access to all of these different animals, you can also get like special visions that you normally wouldn't have. Like you'd go choose a bat and you get echolocation or something. Choose a mole and then you can burrow. That kind of stuff. It's quite useful. Wild Companion I quite like, and if you're not going heavy shapeshifting, that lets you use your wild shape for a different thing. Using a wild shape for a different thing is something that's appeared a lot more often in newer subclasses, and I'm all for it. Because whereas a rage with barbarians, where it just to me doesn't add a lot, in druids it adds a completely different form that they can take. And also, another thing is it'll just generally buff what they can do, whereas rage is all encompassing. I think that's the biggest thing. You're gonna see a lot of times where I'm gonna say something like, it feels like it's contradictory to what I said about the barbarian. But at the end of the day, the problem with the barbarian really can be uh, sort of condensed down into two big things. One, it's all encompassing. It's the only thing that the class does. And that's a huge problem because you're in a situation where after you've done that, because it's a one time effect thing, you got nothing else you do on your turn. And two, and it's sort of connected to the all encompassing one, is that's the only thing it gets. Like, not only is it like a main part of their class, but it's not just a main part, it's the only thing. Like, they get a reckless attack, but that's just to supplement the rage. Whereas, say Wild Shape here, they get access to Wild Shape, and that you could argue is the base druid's only big thing. But it's not the only big thing because they get access to spells, and that's a whole other thing they get. And also, they do get other abilities as well. But the biggest thing is when you look at a martial class like Barbarian, and you look at a Druid class, like a Druid, that's a magic class. Both of them might have all-encompassing mechanics like Wild Shape, with like a couple of side things. But I don't mind that when the Druid has access to magic as well, because magic's another big all-encompassing thing that gives you access to utility, damage, everything. Whereas the Barbarian doesn't have magic to be its other thing, so it's just stuck with this one all-encompassing thing. It just means that it's, to me, a bit boring. Anyway, this, as I said before, alternate ways of using Wild Shape I'm really up for. And generally all we're going to see here is ability score improvements and upgrades to Druid Circle CR. But again, cantrip versatility, big fan of versatility. Huge thing to have in it because it just means you're not stuck with a really bad spell that you chose. Like, oh, I've chosen Poison Spray, but everything we're fighting is undead. So if I'm just stuck in a situation where my only attacking cantrip doesn't work against it. I was like, okay, you hit an ability score improvement thing, you can change a cantrip. Make it Shocking Grasp, make it Firebolt or something. And what is quite useful about these Wild Shape improvements is this. The limitation thing. The CR thing doesn't come up as much unless you're the Moon Druid, but and again you do get extra ablative runes because it takes from these and then your health. But having swimming speed, it will come up at some point. I can guarantee it. Just randomly, you'll be in a situation where maybe you're in like a sunken castle, or you're in a cave system, and there's like, there's water dripping from the ceiling, and there's ponds that go into like an underground lake or something. There'll be a situation where you need swimming speed, and I'll tell you this: when you're in a situation where you need swimming speed and you don't have swimming speed, it feels bad. It doesn't feel good. And so having swimming speed, it will come up and it will be useful. Same with flying speed. Flying speed is very useful because it's the best scouting tool if you're in an open area, and it can be very useful to getting into places they don't want you. So do not knock the fact you get access later on to flying and swimming, because it will come up. Right, back to this. I'm skipping a lot of this stuff because a lot of it is, as I said before, just improvements, ability score improvements, or increasing to CR. This 18th level ability, I don't think it's coming up much, unless you're in a situation where, I guess, a time spell is done on you. This comes up more, I think, if you want a narrative reason why a druid NPC has lived for so long but is not immortal, or why your character from last campaign is still around 100 years later. I rarely see many situations where that comes up, really. This is useful because it just means there's very little reason why if you have a wild shape, you're not in a wild shape because it just means your ablative wounds are a thing, and also you can cast most of your spells. I don't know if that means you can cast all your spells. Somatic verbal. I guess if you need an item and you don't have the item on your wild shape person, like a diamond for Revivify or something, maybe it doesn't come up, but I don't know. Archdruid effectively means that if you're in long form stuff where you're not taking short rests, do you get back your wild shape on a short rest? Uh, this is a feature, again, a short rest. Yeah, you do. So, if you're in a situation where you're in a very, very, very long battle, this gives you something you can do. And then, yeah, it deals with the one thing that you couldn't do. I mean, this still means you can't cast Revivify, which is interesting. But I think you can end wild shapes kind of whenever you want. So it might be okay. Overall, similar to the cleric in this aspect. Not much to talk about when you're talking about the base classes, but in my personal opinion, it's a very, very good class. I think it doesn't have as much narrative help in terms of getting you into the roleplay as, say, cleric does, or warlock that I mentioned before. But I really like the class. I think it gets access to a decent amount of spells, and sustain spells as well, like concentration spells that do damage over and over and over again. Good at healing. It's pretty good at damage dealing. It's pretty decent at support. Not that good at tanking unless you go Circle of the Moon. That's kind of it. Um, Druid, great class. 10 out of 10. I'm a big fan of it. I like nature. Fighter. Now, Fighter's considered the worst class. Like, it's not really close. Um, you can make an argument for the second weakest class. I think mainly if you were talking overall, people might say Monk. They would have said Ranger earlier on, but I think Ranger got a bit more fixed. But Fighter is the generic. It's kind of the generic class. I mean, I hate to say that because generic kind of has connotations of being bad nowadays, but I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying it's bad. God, I wonder how long that thing's been down. Oh, Jesus. Sorry. Again, first stream, not very good at it. That's probably been down and you're not going to be able to hear me as well for a while, but look, I'm not very good at this. I'm new at it. Fighter is, yeah, as I said before, kind of generic. First thing you get, D10. Slightly more, makes sense because you're not a magic caster. You'll probably be taking hits. In some capacity, you could be a ranged combatant, but they're assuming you're gonna be hardier, right, in battle. Let's have a look at some of these fighting styles. They're all decent. It means you can specialize a bit, and I do like fighting styles. I think I praise it as being like probably the best part of a fighter in terms of like, just getting you into the narrative, giving them cool abilities that don't come up much. I don't think it's a particular hot take, but I do kind of feel like Battlemaster is like the Battlemaster features should be base. Like maneuvers should be a thing. But I like them, and I like the newer ones. Don't know how much of this one's coming up, but I do like it narratively. Second Wind, not really come up much because, well, early on it might, but in my opinion, Second Wind It heals you for a bit, but it doesn't heal you enough to counteract the hits they're going to do on you. You might save yourself a hit, but you've used... I don't know. It's good. Don't get me wrong. It's very good. Action Surge, I like it. It gives you an extra action. Kind of the reason a lot of people maybe take 2 levels in Fighter. Maybe 3 to get a subclass feature, I don't know. It's cool. It's very cool. There's not much really to say. It gives you an extra action. It means you can do more stuff. Most of the time you're going to use it as an extra attack. But later on when you get more extra attacks, it means you just get more attacks in general. What else is there to say with it? I mean, it gives you some utility in battle because you can use your action to feed somebody a potion or something. Although a lot of people like rule that as being a bonus action. It being a short rest is quite useful because in most campaigns, again, not really mine, you will be using a short rest a lot more. And if short rests are a lot more of a thing, and you're doing a short rest maybe before every battle, you're going into every battle with this surge of ability and a second wind. One of my friends is in one of the campaigns he's making is making short rests much easier to do, probably as a counter to the fact that we don't take a lot of short rests. But this makes the fighter much stronger when you feel like every battle you're probably going to be taking a short rest before. Maybe not every battle, but a lot of battles. You're going to get access to this feature a lot more. And if you're going into most battles with access to an extra action whenever you want on your turn and a heal, it's not bad. Not horrendous. Archetype, ability score improvements. This versatility thing is interesting. Replacing fighting styles. Maybe you decide that you don't particularly like going just a two-handed weapon and just destroying them. You want to go more to weapon fighting. It helps with that. I quite like that. I like the idea that you are a fighter, so you're very well trained, and so it doesn't particularly matter to you what weapon you're using, really. You're a master of all of them, really. Again, kind of wish the battle masters were base. Extra attacks just normal. You get more of them obviously as a fighter than you get as a barbarian. It's kind of your big thing, but it's supposed to make it so you have more sustained damage. But in reality, you're never going to get to a point where, well, very rarely you're going to get to a point where they run out of spells. Ability skill improvements. You get a lot of these as a fighter. You get more than the average. I like that. I do kind of want to play a fighter now. Now that I've realised how fun feats are, and roll like decent stats, or maybe even standard array. But you kind of feel a bit weak at standard array. But that's kind of the point. And just taking loads of feats. I think it might be interesting. Indomitable doesn't come up much. The friend I was talking about who is changing how short rests work is, I think, buffing Indomitable to effectively be a legendary resistance, which I think is fine. Don't think it's particularly powerful now. I think making it slightly more powerful is great. I still think fighters are going to be much weaker, but I don't think that's something he can change because I think it's a fundamental problem with the system. As much as I love it, and I do really love D&D. I've played a couple of other systems, but D&D is still top for me. I wouldn't mind doing Pathfinder. I just think it looks a bit overwhelming. Second extra attack, as I said, it gets a decent amount of these, and it can help, but I don't know. To me, it doesn't really help too much. I wish you could do more with the attacks. Is all I'll say. More Indomitables, again, they're not going to come up too much. Abilities got loads more ability skill improvements. A second action surge, it might come up, especially with all the short rests of things. Yeah, I mean, this one, it's very generic and there isn't much to talk about because of it. I kind of talked about the most interesting of the classes because of like how it is earliest on, but probably why that one was the longest. I think it was like 40 minutes I talked about that one. Generally, fighter, it's one of the weakest. It's the best one to sort of start off with, really. Some of the later classes are doing some interesting things, but in general, you can do a lot with it because it's just sort of like I don't want to say it's vanilla, but like in a sense, you can do whatever you want with it. It's kind of like a blank sheet of paper. Narratively, it's quite fun. The only problem I feel like you're going to get into is even compared to some half-casters, you're going to be in a situation where you don't feel like you're doing as much as them. They'll be divine smiting or hunter's marking, and like it's little things, obviously. Like that's not huge, and it's not compared to the spellcasters, who personally I feel like you'll definitely be feeling a bit adequate to. At least I will. I do. Um, but like even the ones that are only half casters, that they'll be doing more stuff than you, which will all you'll be doing is basic attack. Some of these, specifically Battlemaster, gives you access to cooler stuff you can do, like a tripping attack or a disarming attack or a pushing attack or something. A commanding strike where you make other people do stuff. But the others are just normally like buffs you can add to yourself. Like the Echo Knight, you make another one of you. Rune Knight, you just become bigger and infuse yourself. Rune Knight's actually okay because you get access to a couple of other abilities you can do, but they're only one-time things. Arcane Archer, again, it's a bit like Battlemaster. It's not that bad. I think the problem with even the Battlemaster and Arcane Archer, they give you access to a lot of stuff. They don't give you a lot of points to use them on. You want more points. You want more uses. Sorry for to put it in a simpler term, and you don't get that a lot. Um. So yeah, I think it's fine. I think generally it falls into the same problem the Barbarian has, except it's slightly better in the sense that it doesn't have a one all consuming ability that doesn't do anything. But it still falls into the martial problem of not having stuff that you can do that has effects. And I think that's probably the biggest problem with it. Next is Monk. Monk is interesting because Monk has a lot of stuff it can do, but from what I've been told and from what I've seen, it falls off later levels to a decent degree, to the point where you're at a similar situation to the Barbarian and Fighter. So it front loads it with decent abilities, but then at the back end you realise it's not doing as well. So it's another one that gets unarmored defense, but this time you're using wisdom because you're wise, you're a monk. It's mostly the Eastern kind of version of a monk. If I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I think that's kind of what it is. Um, with it, you kind of just get a bunch of abilities that they make sense, right? But they're not incredible abilities. Um, let me just go through them, okay? You got unarmed defense, as I mentioned earlier. The fact that it affects into wisdom, and wisdom is also your sort of saving throw thing. If you have any key related abilities that make a saving throw, is quite useful. It not also adding to health does mean it's going to have generally less health than the barbarian, but that's true for everybody. Martial arts is its big thing. Effectively, until the Tasha ability made it so your unarmed attacks or monk weapons get effectively have these dice rolls, unless you have a higher dice roll for them. And you can use dex instead of strength for attacks and damage rolls, which effectively makes you very dex heavy, which is better than being very heavy strength like the barbarian, which is a bonus. Um, what's interesting about this ability is I think it's really good. I really like this ability. It's kind of the ability that it is. It is its biggest ability, and I really like it. Key. This is where it gets really interesting. So key is your points effectively that you can spend. They get pretty high up. Like it's not like the battle master for the fighter and stuff. Um, it gets to like 20. It's not huge, but it's not insignificant. So you spend them, and you can do like an extra attack, which is really handy. I mean, especially lower levels when you're attacking with your attack action, then you're key pointing, attacking with two attacks with your bonus action. You're getting 3 attacks this early on. Sure, they're only doing a D4. Except I guess one of them could be your monk weapon that could do more than a D4. But I mean, that's pretty handy. The fact you can key point dodge, very useful. Very, very useful. Dodging effectively making you, even though you're not got a lot of health, it makes you a decent tank. And Step of the Wind just means you can get out of there. It's pretty decent. You can do a lot of the things that... With Step of the Wind, you're effectively using a key point to temporarily be a rogue. And this ability is insane. Dedicated Weapon, great new ability that they added in Tasha's. It means that you can use... like not just simple melee weapons and short swords. You can effectively attune with a weapon, even if it's a martial weapon, and you become proficient in it, as long as it lacks heavy and special properties, and you can effectively use that for your martial arts. Which is very cool, because if you've read any sort of like cultivation novel, or I think they're called like, I might pronounce this wrong, but it's like the Wuxia kind of novels. They're done a lot in like Chinese society, but yeah, when you're cultivating effectively, you'll see them and they'll be like, I'm effectively what a monk is in terms of like I have a philosophy for my for the way I fight. It's effective martial arts, but they're using weapons like axes and stuff. They're using whatever weapons they can get handy. So having this means you can do that sort of fantasy if you want. Unarmored movement, I quite like this. It's effectively a very unique ability that you saw it in Barbarian, but it's more so in this, where you just have a load of movement. And it makes sense, because if you think of a monk, you think of them like dashing around, like weaving between them. And you combine Step of the Wind, which is the key point, but you will have a lot of key points later levels. And this movement, you can just sort of bob and weave through everyone. Deflect missiles, interesting ability. Effectively, a ranged weapon attack comes at you. You can effectively deflect it like Neo. And you can like reduce the damage, which a lot of the time that's all it's going to do. You get attacked by something, especially on the later levels, and it'll do like, I don't know, let's say 14 damage, and you deflect it, you take like 3 damage or something, and it's pretty cool, like a damage reduction ability. But occasionally you'll reduce it to 0, and then you can catch the thing, and you can throw it back at them for a key point. And that's a really cool ability that I wish came up more, but realistically it doesn't. And I really love that thing. I think they've changed it in the Unearth Arcana thing. Which, by the way, generally, there's a lot of stuff I don't like about it, but the ones I'm talking about are the things I do like. But generally, the change to it to make it so that ranged magic that isn't AoE also can be deflected is such a good thing, because it reminds me of I know it technically wasn't magic, but if in Kung Fu Panda I think it's 2, where you have that peacock guy who's shooting effectively firework cannonballs at Poe, and he picks one up and he does a spin around and he shoots it back. Like, that's a fantasy that you kind of want. And in this world where magic's so prominent, it feels like you should be able to have that. Key fueled attack, attach your ability. Spend a key point or more as part. You spend one key point or more as part of your action on your turn. You make one attack with an unknown as a bonus action before the end of your turn. So I'm a bit confused about this. Because you can use your bonus action to do an unarmed strike anyway. Unarmed strike anyway. So is the logic... Because if you use a key point... Oh, I see. I quite like that then. So it means that even if you use a key point to dodge, you also get an attack. No, wait, it doesn't. No, I guess it's more related to... It's more related to abilities you key for that are more subclass related stuff, I guess. Interesting. Slowfall. Interesting ability. It won't come up much, but when it does, you'll look badass, in my opinion. You fall off a really high building. Everybody's taking full damage is a bit weird anyway because it caps, which is a bit weird. Everyone's falling off. They're taking, let's say they're taking 20 damage or something. Not a huge amount, but not insignificant. At level 4, that's a decent amount of your health. And you go, well, actually, I use my reaction, and I take, because I'm level 4, and it's equal to 5 times your monk level. So you just get rid of all of the 20 damage that everyone was taking, and it's pretty cool. And I think if this was the only ability you had, and it was quite bare, I'd be pissed off that this has taken up a slot. But because monk gets access to so many abilities, not even counting subclasses, I'm not as pissed. Quickened healing. As an action, you can spend 2 key points, roll a martial art die. You gain a number of... That's not great. You're spending 2 key points, which is huge when you can use that on 2 turns to dodge, which probably mitigates more damage than you're going to heal from this, in my opinion. Even if you're getting attacked by one big boss, if you dodge one of its attacks from being in the dodge, taking the dodge action on either one of the 2 turns that you would get with this, you've probably saved more than you've healed there. I think I could only see that being used if I knew for a fact that I had abundance of key points but not a lot of health, and we weren't getting a short rest. Extra attack, it's less of a thing really with monk because they already get so many extra attacks, but it is useful. It's just notably less than if you were any other class. Stunning strike. Now this is the thing that people will say, actually, it doesn't fall off because of this ability. But this is an ability where do a con save. If they fail the con save, they're stunned. Stunned is huge. Stunned is such a huge ability, especially on a big boss. That you're stunning the big boss. Now bear in mind, con save, as I said before, a lot of bosses have high con saves. But if you succeed, bearing in mind this only takes 1 key, you can do it on every attack. It doesn't take up a reaction or anything. You can on this turn, you could have 4 attacks, and then you could spend 4 key on them. So you'd be spending 5 key in total because you'd be using 1 key to use the flurry of blows. To hit them for 4 con saves. The DC is probably pretty low, like 14 or something. But they're gonna have to roll low on one of those, and they're stunned, or they've used the legendary resistance, because realistically they will, because it'll stop them. I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it would stop their legendary actions, it would stop their actual actions, it would stop their reactions. You'd be stuck with maybe lair effects, and that's it. It's huge. It can trivialize boss fights. And because of that, either DMs will heavily prepare for this, or they just won't allow this ability. They'll just give their like creatures either like immunity to stunned, or they just will say no, I won't use this ability. And that's why I still think this needs tweaking and making better late game, because you can't rely on this. Focused aim. When you miss an attack, you can spend 1 to 3 key points to increase your attack roll by 2 for each key point you spend, potentially turning the miss to a hit. Now, I wouldn't mind this if you got your key refunded if it didn't hit. Because in my opinion, if I spend key on this to up it by 2, or even if I spend key on this to up it by, on my attack by 6, I think there's a chance that just because I don't know the AC of something, that I could just miss and I've just wasted 3 key. And I don't like that. I like abilities where you see this a lot on the smites that are spells on paladins. I like abilities that if they don't do anything, I can use them again. Because I don't like them not doing anything. And I'm not talking about like they succeed in a saving throw. I'm talking about I just miss. I don't like that. Now the exception to that is this is just an abilities. I don't like it on spells. Key Empowered Strike. Your counter's magical. This counter is needed for a lot of if you're obviously not going to be using a weapon that will be counting as magical. You have a similar thing on the Moon Druid for its claws, because you're going to be in that form a lot. Your natural weapons kind of have to be magic, or else a lot of enemies you will either do half damage to or no damage to. Evasion. Great ability. Rogues get it as well. Kind of. Not technically, because there are spells that are AoEs that aren't dex, but kind of makes it so that you always take half damage to AoE. In most cases. There is I think there's a couple intelligence saving throws, and there might be a couple con saves. But in general, it just makes it so you take at least half damage from AoE, and possibly absolutely no damage, which is huge. Another 7th level ability, Stillness of Mind. Use your action to get rid of Charmed or Frightened. I wonder if it would even work on Charmed. I don't know the wording on Charmed, but let me look up the wording on Charmed. I'll tell you what, it's just right there. Charmed creature can't attack the charmer or target the charmer with harmful abilities or magical effects. Okay. Okay, so it can be used. I was kind of on the more narrative sort of perspective of, oh, well, you're charmed, so you wouldn't even think to end an effect because you wouldn't think there's anything out of the ordinary. But fair enough. That's pretty useful. Ability skill improvement. At 9th level, you gain the ability to move along vertical surfaces and across liquid on your turn without falling during the move. I like that. It gives you a lot more utility in combat. Honestly, I'm a big fan of that. I think that's a great ability. Purity, I hadn't actually seen that one before, but it makes so much sense because you see so many monks that like in shows and stuff that like run across water or run across the wall, very like Matrix. Purity of body, immune to disease and poison. See, this is another reason why I think like why poison is so bad. It's because even players get access to stuff that makes you immune to poison. I mean, paladins also get this. It's just not really fair. Some races give it. Like if I'm a warforged, I'm pretty sure I'm immune to poison. It's not really fair. Tongue of the Son of Moon. You learn to touch the key of other minds so you can understand all spoken languages. Moreover, any creature that can understand a language can understand what you say. Quite useful. Good out of character thing. I think that that's I think that's fine. I think the DM's probably going to rule it so that there's some a bit of things you can't read, because there's always like you want to have ancient language on the wall, and it might like spell out realistically what would happen, but you don't want them to know it. So there might be some exceptions to it, but I quite like it. I quite like it as a bit of a out of character, maybe utility thing if you're in a situation where maybe you're thrown into an elemental plane. It's like, well, none of us speak what was it, like primordial or whatever. I think they have specific languages, but primordial might be a kind of a all-encompassing one. I kind of see it as like if you had like um, it's kind of like dialects, like how like Puerto Rico has speaks Spanish, but they have a different dialect to other Spanish, and so there's different words and everything. So you could sort of understand it, but you could work with it. Diamond Soul. Your mastery of key is giving you proficiency in all saving throws. Additionally, when you make a saving throw and fail, you can spend 1 week. I like this because this is a generally kind of makes sense. If you think about a monk, they're smart a lot of the time. If you like a stereotypical Eastern monk, most of the time they're very dexterous. Most of the time they're very strong. Most of the time they're very they're unnaturally like strong. Most of the time they're very like hardy. Most of the time they're very charismatic because of their like wisdom. Speaking of wisdom, they're always very wise. Um, and they always have like unnatural sort of like intelligence that you would never even think of. Now you could put a lot of that into wisdom, but it does make sense for this ability to be a thing. Got ability skill improvements and effectively subclass features. Empty body. You become invisible. During that time, you also have resistance to all damage but force. Additionally, you spend 8 key points to cast Astral Projection. Now, if it's just base invisibility, this isn't bad, because I don't think it's a spell that disappears when you hit somebody. So effectively, you're spending 4 key points to become resistant to all damage but force, and force is very, very unlikely. It's like the least popular damage type for like enemy stats. You very rarely see it, maybe in like Eldritch Blasts occasionally, but that's it. You're putting 4 key points to become resistant to all damage while you're invisible. Now, I don't see anything here that says innately that you get broken out by attacking. I think that might be the spell that does it. If that's true, this is a great ability. An astral projection will definitely come up narratively as well. So I think I like those 2 abilities. Finally, there's Perfect Self. This is good because it's like the Bard one, except arguably better. Because I think 4 key points are better than 1 Bardic Inspiration, in my opinion. And then obviously, thing we haven't talked about is throughout this, you're getting more and more increasing to your unarmored movement. That's huge because later on, you've got like base 50 movement. No, it's more than that. You have base 60 movement. Like that's huge. You got double what everyone else has, and you can use the key point to effectively bonus action dash, effectively having 120 movement. That's huge. There's some maps that are smaller than that. It's quite cool. I think Monk in general, it has a problem of late game, but it's much better than other martial classes at the early game. I think in general it's a step in the right direction on what should be done for other martial classes, because it has access to a lot of powerful features that don't make it feel like it's not doing anything. You have access to key, and all of these abilities there, all of these subclasses, they change key. And you'd be saying, well, they do that with Barbarian, but key isn't the only thing. You have this increased movement, you have the martial art die, you You have deflect. Look at all of those abilities: evasion, deflect missiles, slow fall, quickened heal, key fueled attack. You got so many different things. It's just kind of an improvement, like the attribute is based on Dex. Kind of just an improvement over Barbarian with its strength, both in just stuff it can do in and out of combat, in my opinion. Now I'm about, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's like 6 left. I'm about halfway through. Now I kind of wanted to get through all of them, but at the speed I'm going, it would be 4 hours, and I don't really want to do a 4-hour stream. So honestly, probably 2 hours is good for now. So I think I'll end it here. But I mean, I know nobody actually watched this because I saw there's only one viewer and it's probably me. But I had a fun time doing this. I know my stream's a little scuffed. I don't have enough upload. Uh, my computer turns, like, I saw a little black thing appear. I'm pretty sure halfway through it my mic fell down, and so the voice quality was probably pretty shit. But in general, I had a fun time doing it. So you know what? It's a hobby anyway. So that's fine by me. Well, it's a bit weird saying goodbye to the fact that there's no one here, but see ya. See you when I do the second part.